Hello, welcome to this new episode of An Analysis. Joining me today is Tempestuous Might from the Tempestuous Might YouTube channel, a channel that specializes in kind of like collecting various, riff types from death and black metal, various ideas, so a lot of best of lists and all kinds of kind of underground uploads. So hey, Tempestuous.
Hello, Nick. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm all right. So yeah, let's get started. So we were talking about how Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness, was a kind of like the mother, for all of New York death metal in one way or another. Not saying that all those bands, copied Morbid Angel, but they did take a huge part of them. I'm thinking Suffocation, Incantation, Immolation, and they just kind of ran with it in their own separate styles.
And Altars had so many different riff styles on it. Trey had just been collecting riffs up until that point.
Yeah,
they already had a large demo catalog.
Yeah, so on the Altars of Madness, let's start with that before we start talking about the other bands. What is the main influence there, according to you?
Altars on other bands?
Other bands on Altars, more like it.
Okay, well, Altars really started the increase of technicality that we would see in death metal to come. You see Trey experimenting with polyphony. He uses a lot of ornamentation on certain riffs, which really kind of ups the complexity of how everything's structured.
Yeah, but it's honestly, I was listening to Hell Awaits recently, and the gap between Slayer and Morbid Angel isn't that deep. There is quite a lot of similarities. It does kind of work within a thrash metal framework still.
Really.
When we're not out into like full-on death metal, which really,
no, not quite.
Yeah, but it's still so advanced at the same time.
Yeah. They have really complex chromatic riffs in some of the beginnings of the songs on Hell Awaits. It's just they would often just cycle back to basic thrash riffs, which there's nothing wrong with that. But they were still firmly in this thrash speed camp, even though they were beginning to expand on what death metal would become.
Yeah. So do you think it's like mainly Slayer that kind of influenced, that led to Altars of Madness, or there were other bands like Bathory or something?
Well, they certainly took a certain atmosphere. Bathory was experimenting with atmosphere in 87 with what is it, Call from the Grave and songs like that, where they started slowing things down. And Morbid Angel has a touch of that. You can hear that in Immortal Rites and Chapel of Ghouls, where they play really slowly and you hear keyboards start to creep in.
Yeah, definitely. So so from that album, we really got Effigy of the Forgotten, Onwards to Golgotha, and Dawn of Possession.
Yes, indeed.
So,
which may or may not have existed without Morbid Angel, but I think they were definitely changed by what Altars of Madness brought to the table. Because Immolation was already writing some of these songs as early as 87, I want to say, when they were Rigor Mortis.
But I always felt Rigor Mortis always reminded me of kind of like the simpler side of Immolation. What they kept from that. It's a kind of very simple, long form tremolo riffs with 2 or 3 notes that they kind of use as bridges.
Their first demo was very thrashy, and then they started hearing the more creepy and dissonant sides sweep into their material.
Yeah. So was Dawn of Possession like that pretty much removed any thrash influence there was?
Yeah, well, a lot of their demos, they were still working on those songs, so you hear very faint bits of that. But for the most part, yeah, Dawn of Possession changed up their entire sound, and that's when they started doing the backwards riff type things and started really playing around with more dissonance.
All right, so what is a backwards riff? We've talked a lot about that, so go into details, please.
So you hear in Altars of Madness' very first track, Immortal Rites, it's played backwards, right? Before it goes into the main riff.
Yes.
It's the same riff, just it's backwards, like they reversed the tape or something. And I think probably like a lot of bands got influenced from this, like At the Gates. Didn't Alf listen to listened to his own riffs backwards. He like reversed them, and that's how he came up with new riff types.
Yeah. Also, a lot of folk. I think a lot of Swedish folk, like
Oh
tapes
yeah, yeah,
backwards.
indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe if Immolation didn't exactly do what Alf was doing, maybe they got influence from that somehow.
It's very true. There is so much dissonance on Altars of Madness that we don't realize, but it's not dissonance for the sake of dissonance like we get with a lot more, atmospheric and modern bands.
No,
It's like really, really cool riffs came from that dissonance. Evil Spells is some
it's very
dissonance.
dystopian to me. Dawn of Possession is very dystopian. It sounds like a hellish earth.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that.
And I think it kind of fits their subject matter. They're progressing past God, beyond spirituality. Spirituality. I can't talk today, but
No
it's
worries.
very Armageddon-esque, I would say.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you take away a lot of that Morbid Angel influence from Dawn of Possession, you kind of have a somewhat advanced thrash metal album. I think it's
Yeah,
really
really, yeah.
those melodies, those kind of dissonance, like you said, they sound like normal kind of metal melodies, but played backwards.
Yeah,
That's really what
quite
pushed them
strange.
ahead.
And then Morbid Angel were one of the first to start using pinch harmonics, were they not?
Um,
You hear a couple of them, not very many.
I'm
You hear a
tempted.
couple of them in certain songs.
I'm tempted to say that like some thrash metal had pinch harmonics, but
Yeah,
I always felt that it was something that came in thrash like maybe in the 90s when it went to
yeah,
towards
yeah,
that groovy kind of style, where you had the chug chug height squeal, to kind of have that contrast.
yeah, yeah. But as far as I can tell, in death metal at least, they're one of the first to do it. And then the '90s is when that really took off. Immolation and Incantation were probably the two premier exhibitionists of that particular sound.
All right, let's listen to the intro of Immortal Rites. All right, so Tempestuous, what can you tell us about that riff we just heard?
Well, it's obvious from the drum pattern that it was reversed.
Oh yeah, definitely. You can even hear the distortion, but it sounds so great, and I think it adds a lot more impact when it's kind of played back the normal way. But even the normal way is very twisted.
Yeah. Then the percussion is very unique. That's one thing that started making death metal unique was the use of percussion, use of more polyrhythms and such.
But I mean, what can you tell us about Sandoval's playing that kind of pushed it away from thrash metal?
The sound of Alf, is that what you said?
Sandoval, Pete
Oh,
Sandoval.
Sandoval. Oh, Sandoval. Well, in Slayer, the double bass is very straightforward. It's just charging ahead. And Sandoval started using it in fills. He started using it kind of choppy, like rhythmically. So he would play along with the riffs and kind of fill the space in between the chugging and whatnot. So you can start to hear that in Suffocation. Suffocation by Morbid Angel is probably as it begins, it's probably one of their most technical pieces. The way
Yeah,
the drums interplay with the guitars.
yeah, that's something I really agree with because sometimes with thrash metal, especially bands like Metallica, you kind of have like a rockish, I'm just following along, not really
Yeah,
adding much.
yeah.
Whereas here, Sandoval like completely flipped the script.
Oh
You've
yeah,
got
he did.
you've got times where the drums are kind of just blasting it, in like a somewhat separate plane by themselves. But then there are times where they're really locked in tight and they're kind of, like you said, filling in the gaps of what what the guitars are doing. And I think Immolation was really the band to take that idea and fucking go through the roof with it, to new
Yeah,
extremes.
Suffocation took it to an even further level. You start hearing Suffocation where they chop up blast beats. They don't finish them out. Like Morbid Angel had sections of blasting, sure, but Suffocation would blast, stop, play a beat, then blast again, and that was really progressive at the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not, we're not like Slayer where you kind of Dave Lombardo, a great drummer, great as he is, he's just kind of going, just kind of straightforward, just
Yeah, where
matching
it's
the
more
intensity.
Slayer's more non-syncopated. Morbid Angels, where syncopation really starts taking hold.
Exactly, and that the intro riff of Immortal Rites is so syncopated, but it doesn't feel like if it's syncopated for the sake of rhythm. It really
Oh,
pushes the melody, in the forefront.
yeah, it plays the guitar very well.
Yeah, so I think we can definitely see where all three of the New York bands were obviously influenced by that part, but I really think that that's something that Immolation took and really went with it. Let's listen, to that melodic riff in Evil Spells quickly.
Sure.
Yeah. So, as you were saying, this is really what, where pinch harmonics kind of really crept into death metal.
Yeah.
Because they are central to that kind of I wouldn't call it a chorus, but it's definitely, derived from the kind of
No,
heavy metal scream the song titles
yeah,
name.
it's similar. The riff is just it's just a percussive element. It's just very strange.
Yeah,
And how it's bookended by that pinch harmonic. It's not very loud, Immolation and Incantation put a lot more emphasis on that later on. But no, it's just kind of in the back, and you kind of hear faint squealing,
Yeah, because
interesting.
it's a very interesting riff, and I think it's these kind of riffs that really set the New York death metal apart from the rest of the world. Just kind of like taking these small details from Morbid Angels, Altars of Madness, and just really running home, to pushing it as far as they physically could.
Yeah, and all four bands we're talking about today had such a major impact on death metal. They all had their own unique vision. They may have taken from each other at certain points, but overall, I would say that they're very much unique artists. They very much have a sound that they wanted to express, and they did their best to express that.
Yeah,
And of course, they're indelible parts of the pantheon now.
You know what? Let's talk about one thing that Immolation do, even Incantation. This is really Immolation and Incantation thing, not quite as much Suffocation, but the use of really simple tremolo riffs to kind of make two different vastly contrasting ideas stick together.
Oh yeah, yes indeed. They used that as kind of a bridge. Well, Immolation used it as a bridge, in between some of their more dissonant or some of their more standout melodies. And Incantation, the tremolo riffs were kind of the point, and they expanded on those. It's like they would take certain elements, certain notes from each tremolo riff and do something with them. It's very, very interesting how they wrote their songs and on where to go about it.
You have an example for us? So yeah, that riff, obviously it's much bassier, much, not simpler,
fleshed out.
Yeah, it's very primal riff, but you can definitely like that riff would not be out of place on Altars.
No, really, it wouldn't be out of place in Immolation either.
Yeah, and you have a lot of the kind of like you said, the syncopated part, because it's a two-part riff, right? It's a call and response. So you've got the first kind of very syncopated thing that Suffocation would have like just used that exclusively.
Certainly.
But it's kind of, it leads really well to that kind of backwards tremolo kind of melody that
it really does.
Morbid Angel would use, and it's just such a fantastic opener. It's one of my favorite openers in death metal.
As Finnery said, death metal is pretty much sped up form of music with guitars, so you can certainly hear that. Bands were setting out to write the most twisted riffs they possibly could.
Yeah, and it works because it still has to be memorable. It has to be something. You can't just shove 25,000 notes together and it's like, hey, I kind of have a spooky riff.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. Incantation, out of the kind of big NYDM free, was always the least nuanced. You kind of,
Yeah, a lot more straightforward, but
yeah, but still very good at what they did. Obviously, God knows how many bands have copied their riffs, note for note.
oh yeah, really. Especially now, ever since like 2010, when the 2010 death metal bands started coming in, a lot
Yeah,
of them were pretty much in incantation clones, were they not? And
yeah,
then that style hasn't seemed to die down any, sadly. So I feel like it's sort of cheapening the art of what incantation we're doing.
yeah, definitely. It's one of those simple bands where you can very easily miss the point, if you copy them too much.
Oh, really? Well, incantation, they had some sort of inner well inside of them, that dictated what they were doing. And I think a lot of these new bands are just, copying that. They don't have an inner dialogue that compels them to release music, compels them to write art.
On that riff by Morbid Angel, they go for like a slightly more straightforward, tremolo picked riff, but it has those little kind of power chord flourishes in there. And, despite it being so simple, you can really, it's such a powerful riff. And you can tell that Incantation took such ideas, made them bassier, probably slowed things down a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit in certain parts. Yeah.
Yeah. But
it's a good riff. It's fun. It's very energetic, really.
Exactly. It's energetic, but it still has that
Morbid
kind of
Angel,
horror.
They're almost going back to some punk roots there. But it's a lot darker than punk would be,
Yeah.
A lot more extreme, a lot faster.
Yeah, played with a lot more precision, but I can definitely, hear some, kind of like early Black Flag stuff in there.
And then how they begin that riff, the palm muted section, Suffocation took that idea to like great extremes, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And talking about Suffocation, there's that one riff from the Morbid Angel Suffocation.
Oh yes, of course, yeah. And I think it's kind of a bit ironic how that's probably the most rhythmically complex song on that album, and Suffocation, was the most rhythmically complex death metal band of the time.
I think it's not, the first riff, like the kind of slow, the slow chuggy riff. Obviously, Suffocation were doing a lot with it. But what really interests me is the relationship between that chuggy riff and then the way it goes into the tremolo riff.
Oh yeah, right. Let's listen to it real quick. So good.
Oh yeah, because what I love about how they did this is that, so you've got the kind of syncopated power chord riff, and you have the tremolo riffs, but both like they're variations of each other. They're very like melodically very similar, but it's just the contrast in rhythm that really makes it stand out.
Yeah, really, yeah.
The acceleration.
Pete really came into his own there. That's how he got known as Pete the Feet. Yeah, but yeah, the drumming is fantastic. How it goes from blast beats to fills with double basses. It's really fast. It's really athletic. People describe death metal as athletic, and that's pretty much the prime example of athleticism in death metal. Pretty early on.
Yeah, definitely. There's another part I would like to listen to from the same song. It's 1 minute 50 seconds in.
Such a mocking riff, isn't it?
Literally, yeah. So that's literally what I was going to say, because what? Suffocation are the kings of the mocking riff. Even the Terrence Hobbs and Doug Cerrito solos sound absolutely like they're mocking the listener.
And death metal, people say it doesn't really have much emotion. And a lot of times they're right. Death metal is kind of a zen, but sometimes you hear anger. In this case, it's some weird sort of twisted joy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
like a triumphant type joy. Just just reveling in blasphemy.
Yeah, very sarcastic, maybe sometimes. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
ways to kind of interpret that
mocking. Yeah,
emotion, but it's just fantastic because you really feel the kind of it sounds cringe, but the what evil, you know,
yeah, evil. Yeah, but it's not evil in the way that most people think, where they think fire and brimstone. No, it's the evil dancing on the idols, casting down statues, and destroying the sacred. What most
yeah,
people hold sacred, at least.
yeah, the inversion of all values.
Indeed, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it's fitting for certain moods, is it not?
It's the dawn of the crucified. Suffocation. It's the dawn of the crucified. Suffocation.
Notice in the second instance of that how the harmony comes in.
Yeah,
Really gives it a sickening lurch, doesn't it?
exactly, because it's all it goes back to another mocking riff, but the way it goes from that mocking riff into the literal suffocation breakdown.
Oh yeah, 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 indeed. Yeah.
And they only play it twice, but like Suffocation, it's not like a short riff, it's not like a 4-bar riff that they repeat, 4, 8, 16 times. It's like this really long, twisted riff
Oh yeah.
that they repeat twice and it never comes back into the song.
Yeah, it's very tedious in a way, the breakdown. It's but Sepultura did this as well. Slayer did this on a Angel of Death. I forget which song Sepultura did. I think it was Necromancy. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think if we're
Or
thinking about
maybe
the
it's
same
the
riff.
first track on the album.
Yeah. But
Sure,
it's funny,
a few bands did that before Morbid Angel, but Morbid Angel certainly probably popularized that, at least in death metal. That was on the first Sepultura EP, and Sepultura weren't really out until Schizophrenia is when people really start taking notice.
Yeah, because they increased the technicality of Schizophrenia, and I think it fell more in line with what people were expecting of thrash metal at the time. Not to say it does. It's a solid record. It has moments, but it definitely is a step down from Morbid Visions.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, Morbid Visions I think is probably their best.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, this part, man, like this entire song, it's only 3 minutes, barely over 3 minutes long.
Oh yeah, it's packed with verses, not.
Yeah, and there's so much variety in the riff types, and
there's so much going on. And there's so much ornamentation in the riffs too. You hear, you hear the Black Sabbath bends. You hear a few scant pinch harmonics, and it's a bit complex. You could definitely tell the death metal is upping the complexity at this point, even past what Slayer did on Hell Awaits. And they're really focusing on structure. They're focusing more on structure than just more linear, like other bands were at the time. Death was very linear.
Yeah, and here, within all these riff types, we can see kind of like for at least 3 different riff types from this song only, in which Suffocation, managed to make a fantastic career from.
Oh yeah, yeah. They really focus on rhythm. As you said, they have very mocking riffs, and when they do have melody, it's a very strange melody.
So let's talk about the kind of like the most popular song from this album, the Chapel of Ghouls, right?
Oh yes, indeed.
So
another song of immense breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. So the kind of intro and breakdown of that song, which is absolutely iconic, to even the kind of the most casual death metal fan out. But that simple breakdown, Suffocation did a lot of stuff with that. Even Immolation, they had a few kind of
oh yeah,
very simple chugging riffs. Thinking songs like Despondent Souls.
Yeah, Despondent Souls was heavy.
Exactly.
And even their first song, they have a breakdown, and then the way he plays the fills through there while it's going down, it's not chugging, but it's a definite slowdown. And they have almost like they wrote their own language into the music. They have 2 dissonant parts going on at once. I think it's in the very first song, Into Everlasting Fire. Morbid Angel did something similar. I forget which song it is, but pretty much the drums are driving the breakdown.
Everlasting fire.
Sinister.
Oh my, literally that entire section, you down tune it a bit, make it bassier, heavier.
Oh, yeah, indeed.
It's incantation, literally.
Yeah.
Fantastic riff. You know, it's really where you get to see the kind of horror music influence, the combination between the chugging palm muted part and the very melodic tremolo. But then, yeah, I love the ornamentation here. You know, this kind of keyboards that come up in the background.
And then the back end of that riff is the riff they played earlier, tremolo style. You know.
Oh, yes.
Dun, 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 dun. And earlier they were playing.
Oh, yes. You know, you said rotting spiritual embodiment. Yes, literally. My God.
Yeah.
You know, I hate how these riffs were kind of taken out of context by a lot of modern bands to be made into simple caveman riffs.
Yeah. They had a lot more going on than people get credit for.
You know?
They were layered, you know, there were multiple guitar tracks on that, fleshing the sound out and playing just little tiny differences.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. You know, it really has the kind of horror feeling, you know. The evil is out there, you know. It's literally a very strong
Incantation was very much a wall of sound type band. You could tell they took a lot of time layering things to where they were just perfect enough.
Oh, yeah,
very bassy.
Yeah, the sound of Onward to Golgotha, it's just fantastic. You know, you've got the kind of natural bass and muddiness, but still clear enough to make everything, you know. And I love it. You know, I think this is literally, you know, in riffs like these, the only thing that actually changes are the aesthetics, you know. The drumming style is a lot more kind of, not as manic, you know, a lot more kind of calculated, even more precise, I dare say. The deeper guttural vocals. Yeah,
Vincent was a bit higher in the altars, wasn't he? And Blessed was when he really started using more, you know, gruff, roaring type voice.
It's insane, like, you know, how much Incantation took such an idea and they just literally ran their own way with it. It's fantastic.
Oh, yes.
I love hearing stuff like this, you know, when you can make a million different kind of subgenres from one album.
Oh, yeah, really.
can you tell us, like, how did that influence all those bands? Because I can hear everything, all in the entire NYDM in that.
Well, first, I think that's very, you know, that riff was one of the first like true instances of polyphony in death metal, right? It's almost
yeah.
counterpoint. Probably not quite, but you know, Trey was taking a lot of influence from classical music at the time, from what I've heard, you know, Mozart and like, and maybe you can kind of hear that there. That might be the beginning of like a classical influence on death metal.
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, I don't think it's polyphony because there'd have to be a lot, very independent. But it's
Yeah.
kind of, but it reminds me of what the black metal guys were doing shortly after. Just kind of,
Oh yeah, certainly, yeah.
adding those little melodic elements on top of each other.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's such a rich and a very expressive part because you can kind of take a lot of different emotions, and it's very captivating part. And it's what I love about really the NYDM bands is how they had those such such strong and captivating tremolo pick drifts above all, above all
yeah.
the tricks. That's what you come for. You want those horror tremolo pick drifts, and the melody at the front of everything. And this is the ultimate embodiment of that.
Yeah, and the Florida style, it used a lot of the tremolo pick riffs too, but they were really simple, and they were just kind of bridging the gap in between certain things. But Immolation and Incantation, you really start to see where it becomes one of the main points of their songs, especially in Incantation. Immolation still uses them as bridges a lot, but they're very much a focal point of the song. And Morbid Angel perhaps could be to blame for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, even Suffocation had, they had a lot of tremolo picking.
Oh yeah, they did. It wasn't quite as melodic, as the other ones.
But we can still hear, that Visions from the Dark Side riff. It's so good because it's so layered. You can interpret it in so many different ways depending on what you're listening to, on how you feel. Your sound system. It's
the best experiences on headphones, really, where you can hear both guitar lines and what they're doing, kind of independently of each other. I think that's where a lot of death metal gets away with, like, just this very slight polyphony. It's not really counterpoint, but they have a lot of crossover, because the electric guitar is an instrument that's so noisy, it's so overbearing. You get a lot of accidental tones in there.
Yeah.
And if the right artist or producer can pick up on that, they can create more with it, by harmonizing those tones and making other melodies, perhaps. What's up behind? If that makes any sense.
And it keeps things in place, because the guitar tone is so dense and rich. If you have contrasting melodies going on at the same time, you get just a wall of noise where you can't decide anything.
I think now it's kind of a problem. Certain things, everything's been compressed to hell, so it's hard to hear, all those accidental tones that we used to hear in the old days with the analog recordings. Everything's just so compressed now. It takes away a lot of the sound, which
of course. And the harmonics are removed after the recording, all the little the little hand which mistakes.
Not necessarily a bad thing, but you do lose something too. You lose something by gaining something.
Well, thanks for checking in, everyone, and listen. I know, man.
And I'm grateful to be on Hessian Firm. I've been loving seeing how you've expanded this over the past couple of years. It's taken things way out of what I thought it was going to be. Things have really grown and expanded from there.
Thanks.
It's grown way bigger than I ever thought.
It's great to hear. Always looking up your YouTube channel, always talking about metal and discovering bands. So that's great. So anyone listening to this, feel free to check out Tempestuous Might's YouTube channel. That'll be linked below.